Strategy Management Series. Video number 85 Strategy Formulation. Step 7 Strategy Evaluation. Industry Attractiveness Matrix. Welcome back to the Ready MBA series on strategy management. In our previous sessions, we delved into strategy evaluation, the seventh step of the strategy formulation process. This stage entails scrutinizing potential strategies for their impact, benefits, costs, and resource requirements. To aid in this process, we introduced the Strategy Choice Cascade Framework, as outlined by A. G. Lafley and Roger L. Martin in their book Playing to Win. This framework assists the planning team in crafting coherent and impactful strategies that can be thoroughly evaluated. Today, we continue the discussion started in the previous episode about industry attractiveness, the assessment of industries or market segments where companies can choose to compete as part of their strategies. Choosing where to play is one of the key components of the Strategy Choice Cascade Framework, more specifically the second step. Where will we play? We will introduce a visual representation of industry attractiveness in the form of a 2x2 matrix, also known as Industry Attractiveness Matrix. This matrix allows for a quick and visual assessment of key dimensions impacting industry profitability, buyer and supplier power, and threats from new entrants and substitutes. It also enables the identification of the level of overall attractiveness of the industry, supporting the planning team's decision of where to play or where to compete. This analysis uses Michael Porter's 5 forces framework, quantifying the forces exerted in the industry by suppliers, buyers, new entrants and substitutes. Internal rivalry is not considered in the matrix, but the competitive scenario will be more carefully examined later, in subsequent steps of the Strategy Choice Cascade. Before we move into the description of the matrix itself, let's do a quick recap of the main elements of the industry attractiveness analysis, discussed in detail in our previous episode. Initially, the planning team must delineate the industry boundaries by defining the product scope and geographic scope. These dimensions are crucial as they determine the players involved in the industry. Product scope is determined by the consumer needs and wants the product addresses, with slight variations affecting the segment's composition. Similarly, geographic scope defines the geographical area the company intends to cover, with variations altering the industry landscape and participants. Selecting where to compete is crucial, but equally vital is identifying where not to engage. Next, the planning team must map all industry constituents within its boundaries and group them as part of the 5 following elements: suppliers, buyers, new entrants, substitutes and competitors. Each one of these groups will exert one type of force in the industry that will make it more or less profitable, consequently more or less attractive. Suppliers' power can impact a company's costs and supply chain, while also controlling access to vital inputs and resources. If suppliers' power is high, industry players' profitability will decrease because costs will increase. Buyers have the power to negotiate prices and demand favorable terms, which can lead to reduced revenues and profits. Additionally, their preferences and changing needs can render a company's products or services obsolete or less competitive in the market. If buyers' power increases, industry profitability decreases because prices drop and costs go up. New entrants can increase competition and disrupt existing market shares, impacting revenues. Additionally, they may disrupt the supply chain, leading to increased demand for critical resources and inputs. If threat of new entrants is high, profitability is low because industry prices drop and costs increase. Substitutes can provide alternative solutions that reduce demand for a company's products or services. If the threat of substitutes in the industry is high, profitability drops as prices decrease while costs increase. As a rule of thumb, industries characterized by strong forces typically exhibit lower profitability and are less appealing. Conversely, industries with weaker forces tend to offer higher profitability and greater attractiveness. Now here's how to create the Industry Attractiveness Matrix. 1. Assign scores. Examine the industry data collected and evaluate each of the 4 forces: threat of entrants, supplier bargaining power, buyer bargaining power, threat of substitutes. A high barrier to entry and absence of substitutes indicate a lucrative industry with high value potential. If suppliers wield greater size and influence, they command a larger portion of the value generated. Conversely, powerful buyers, such as Walmart compared to small manufacturers, can negotiate for a larger share of the value. Assign a rating to each force using a scale that aligns with the analysis, such as 1-5 or 1-10, where lower numbers denote lower threat power and higher numbers denote greater threat power. 2. Calculate axis scores. Combine scores. For axis 1, add the scores for threat of entrants and threat of substitutes. For axis 2, add the scores for buyer bargaining power and supplier bargaining power. Example, in a scale of 5, if you scored threat of entrants as 3, supplier bargaining power as 4, buyer bargaining power as 2, and threat of substitutes as 5, your scores for the axis would be: axis 1 to 3, threat of entrants, plus 5, threat of substitutes, equals 8. Axis 2 to 2, buyer bargaining power, plus 4, supplier bargaining power, equals 6. 3. Create the visual matrix. Draw a two-dimensional grid. Label the vertical axis as axis 1, threat of entrants and substitutes, and the horizontal axis as axis 2, buyer and supplier bargaining power. Divide into quadrants. Mark the midpoint of each axis to create 4 quadrants. 4. Plot the industry position. Locate the coordinates. Find the point on the grid where the calculated scores for axis 1 and axis 2 intersect. Mark the industry position. Place a marker, e.g., a dot, symbol, or label, at that point to represent the industry's attractiveness based on the combined forces. 5. Interpret the results. Analyze the quadrant. The quadrant in which the industry falls indicates its relative attractiveness. Quadrant 1. Highly attractive, low buyer and supplier bargaining power and low threat of new offerings. This quadrant depicts a potentially lucrative industry where businesses can wield significant control over pricing and maintain healthy profit margins. Take, for instance, the luxury goods industry. Buyer bargaining power is low due to factors like a limited buyer base, high perceived value, and strong brand loyalty, reducing their negotiating leverage. Similarly, the threat of substitutes is low, given the unique characteristics of the products, limited availability of substitutes, and high switching costs associated with alternative options. Quadrant 2, moderately unattractive, low threat of new offerings and high supplier and buyer bargaining power. This quadrant signifies an industry with mixed attractiveness, presenting both opportunities and challenges. Take, for instance, the commercial aircraft industry. New offerings don't pose a significant threat, helping maintain stable pricing. However, buyers exert pressure on prices, and stronger suppliers may hold leverage over industry players. For example, in the commercial aircraft industry, robust suppliers, particularly those supplying commercial engines, and powerful buyers with bargaining power can limit overall industry attractiveness. Quadrant 3, moderately unattractive, high threat of new offerings and low supplier and buyer bargaining power. This quadrant also indicates an industry with mixed attractiveness, presenting a blend of opportunities and challenges. For instance, consider the food service industry, specifically restaurants. New offerings pose a threat due to low entry barriers and various substitute options like food trucks, snacks, and grocery stores. However, weaker suppliers offer some leverage for existing businesses, and buyers don't exert excessive pressure on prices. Despite the presence of substitutes and low entry barriers, the industry experiences moderate pressure from suppliers and buyers, making it a mixed bag in terms of attractiveness. Quadrant 4, very unattractive, high threat of new offerings and high supplier and buyer power. This quadrant signifies a potentially unattractive industry. New offerings can easily enter and challenge existing players, while powerful suppliers and buyers further squeeze profit margins. Example, the healthcare industry. While high barriers exist, strong entrants emerge such as new technologies, telemedicine, wearables, and alternative healthcare providers, e.g., urgent care clinics, retail clinics, creating a growing threat, particularly in specific subsectors. Pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, and insurance companies all hold significant power due to the specialized nature of their products and services. Health plans, government agencies, like Medicare and Medicaid, and large self-insured companies possess significant leverage. They can negotiate lower prices and influence healthcare providers' service offerings. 6. Consider implications. Assessing the scores on each axis provides insight into the primary drivers of industry attractiveness and reveals potential challenges or opportunities. In some industries, addressing suppliers' and buyers' bargaining power may be crucial. In others, the threat of new entrants or substitute offerings due to low entry barriers may be the focal point. Based on this analysis, the planning team should formulate strategic recommendations tailored to the specific industry context. This may entail leveraging competitive advantages, erecting barriers to entry, nurturing supplier and buyer relationships, or exploring niche markets with less competition. It's important to remember that by adjusting industry boundaries, such as product scope and geographic scope, companies can alter industry dynamics, potentially uncovering lucrative niches with reduced competitive forces and higher profitability. And this concludes our episode about Industry Attractiveness Matrix as a support tool to define and articulate industries where to compete. Please be sure to check our next episodes where we will continue to detail the where to play step of the strategy choice cascade framework. Until then, keep strategizing. See you soon.